by the time the combine rolls around.
Yep. We're recording.
But I don't make any decisions
Yeah.
on rookies
So
until
the combine is coming in a couple weeks, or
uh, it's
is it
late,
March or
yeah, mid March, I think.
mid-March?
Yeah, yeah, it'll be
Kind
a
of.
few weeks.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't get too excited about the rookies until then, and then I never make a final decision on my rookie chart until draft capital comes around.
Yeah.
That's been the one factor that has always been better. And then, of course, you look at the opportunity for guys outside the top 15 picks.
Yeah. So are you
I look at
going
opportunity.
to think about opportunity? You emailed me that sample, and I started
Yeah,
thinking it would be nice if you had an opportunity score. And I understand you're just starting out. I would not be afraid to start throwing things out. I mean, you don't have to advertise it, but I think you'll get better. And it would be nice if it divided. So if you say they've got A opportunity versus a B or a C, that would be nice to know, and we could track that. I mean, you in science, you got to develop a metric to find out is it worthy of our time or not, and that's kind of what we're doing. A lot of ways is we're trying to validate what we're doing, but some things like opinions, like in horse racing, there were people that score horses by their workouts, the way their muscles
yes.
move and the hoof action. The higher the hoof, the more likely they like turf or dirt, or I heard all sorts of things. A big ass on the grass. I always heard that. If you have a lot of muscles in your back, you could run better on turf.
Yep.
Or I've heard all, or your hoofs are wider, you can do better in the mud, or whatever it is. I don't remember. But you got to start somewhere. And I just thought, your opportunity, if you could start putting, and again, it may be A, C, and F, maybe. I mean, it may not be A, B, just kind of seems good, average, doesn't look good. Maybe that's how you do it, A, C, or F, or whatever, one, two, or three, or whatever. But A, usually everybody think, A, C, F, that means something to people. So I just thought that might be easier to do than maybe A, B, C, D is a
Yeah, and
little bit more complex, but maybe you should do A, B, I mean, A, C, or F, for now or something. And you can
yeah, and
move.
that's yeah,
I
I
would
think it's
like
a
to
good
see that.
idea
I would
to
like that
to
metric
show
so we
to
could
show
track.
that opportunity.
Well, it'd be nice if we
Yeah, and,
had
and
then
it's
MVP and the Bush numbers and comms and all this other stuff. It'd be nice to look beforehand. In other words, okay, we've got 20% of the population is an A opportunity. Of those, how many, project to have, say MVP or Bush number? I mean, if they're rookies, then we don't have that, but there's some metric or something. And maybe, I mean, is this opportunity for rookies or is this anybody's opportunity? Second, third year. In other words, we'll
yeah,
have data on some of those guys, maybe if they've had a limited,
yeah,
I don't know how you look at that.
yeah. The interesting thing is I'm just getting into it now, and
Mhm.
so I thought originally when I started into this, because one of the things I've used is that 80 MVP score. And I've
Yes.
said if a running back didn't have a fully established, meaning 10 games or more
Uh-huh.
in that previous season, 80 score, he was susceptible to losing his job.
Right.
Now I'm seeing that it's a little more complex than I thought. And how many times do you see people say, oh, they've got a bona fide starter at running back. There's no way they're picking somebody else up in the draft or adding a free agent, and then they do. Well, the reason is because the contract on that player is coming up soon, or there's an out in that contract that is coming up soon. So, like James Conner, he's got a potential out right now. He's got a better out after 25, and his contract's up in 26. It doesn't make any sense at running back for the Cardinals to have waited. So when they had a guy like Trey Benson available in the draft, why not grab him? Because now you've got him protected until 27. Okay. You got him under team control till at least 27, 28 if you take his you franchise tag him, but that's expensive. But even under the rookie deal, you've got him now till 27. That gives you a lot of flexibility with James Conner. Now, if Conner says, hey, I don't want to renegotiate, I'm happy with this deal, they've got a guy to fall back on. And then you look at other situations, and they're like Bijan Robinson is all world, right? Tyler Algar's contract is up after this year.
Interesting.
So if Atlanta's in a situation in round 3 or 4 where they feel like they've got a running back that makes sense, it's not like they're drafting him to take over for Bijan or even compete with Bijan. But Bijan Robinson, his last year on the contract is 26. These running backs like to hold out before their last contract.
Right.
So now if they draft a guy, he's on their roster till 28. So they're not looking for 1 year like this year's replacement. They're playing checkers while the rest of us are looking at this game like checkers. They're playing chess while we're playing checkers. and that's the difference. And that is that's what I'm just starting to understand with this opportunity index is, I look at it and, okay, Atlanta's solid at running back with Robinson and Algar, but they're not going to be solid in a year or two. They're going to need to replace Algar. They're going to next year, they're going to be having to replace Bijan possibly next year if he holds out, or he's going to be a big contract, or he's going to be eligible for a trade. Like all of these things could happen before the 26 season. They have to be protected. But at quarterback, they're set. They got Cousins under contract till 27. They've got Penix under a rookie deal until 27. There is no way in hell. That's an F for running back. And I think the opportunity index, for quarterback, I think the opportunity index is going to be more of a like if they don't need a guy over the next 2 years, that's an F.
Interesting.
If they need a replacement immediately, that's an A.
I would, Dennis, when you do, and it's not a downside. I think you need, if you believe, and I mean, I don't know how we would predict this, but if you believe it could be something, you almost need to record what you just told me so that next year, okay, this is what they did. This is what I was thinking. This is how it occurred. Kind of as you retrospect into this, go back to your notes and say, oh yeah, I missed that contractor. In other words, I think if the thing is, I don't know, is it worth the effort to do it? Is it easily done or getting that information, right? The data you just said, is it logical? In other words, do all coaches or front offices, are they logical about it? You just stated logic.
No.
Right? You and I, logic.
Yes.
Is it logical or is it specific to the people? So, like, Washington's front office has been pretty logical, but Atlanta hasn't.
Correct.
This can get
Correct.
a little unwieldy. Here's my encouragement to you. I think the more nebulous it is and the harder it is, probably more likely to pay off. Because if it's easy,
Yes.
everybody's going to know it and
Everybody's
do it.
doing it.
Just like the
Yeah.
buyer numbers,
Yeah.
right? Before he came out with it, it was really hard to understand track variance and the was it fast, was it slow, people were guessing and had different methods, and it paid him to be deep. And I
Yes.
think
Yes.
the way when you hit me with it and I came back and texted you, I really think this could be really complex, but we could get an advantage, especially in dynasty. Dennis, I think, I
Yes.
wonder in your
Yes.
dynasty, have you kind of been, I'm not saying you were just spotlighting, but just something you kind of knew. It's like, yeah, this seems a little murky, this situation, or you see what I'm saying? I could see dynasty people really needing this
Well,
information.
yeah. Yeah. And here's the thing, professors, this already has a sort of a comparison I can make because before I put a real definition down for MVP,
Right,
it's been like 10 years that I've been looking at those three factors.
right.
But it wasn't until like 2.5 years ago that I put them together to be a a real thing.
Yeah.
And this is the same, this is at that same process. This is at the process of I know there's something here. This is the mentality I've had
Mhm.
for playing Dynasty and trying to find these guys. Now let's try to put some logic to it, put it down on paper, okay? Commit to
That's
this.
it. That
Now,
process, Dennis, of you doing that, I think is going to pay good
yes.
dividends.
Yeah.
I
And
really
and
do.
I
I don't know this year, but I
but
think
putting it
down the road.
down,
Yeah.
no,
It,
no. This year, if I get one, if I get like 1 out of 5 right, okay,
yeah.
I'm looking good. And here's the thing is I'm only looking at the skill positions.
Right.
So I could say, okay, yeah, this is a big need, but if they have 5 more big needs elsewhere on the team, they're going to fill those and they're going to let this go unfilled. Okay. I don't have the
Effort.
knowledge
Yeah.
base
Yeah.
to let alone
Is there
I don't have the,
something that we could come up with DApps, or is there anything that would be a poor substitute to give you an idea? Is that
PFF, the PFF's scores on players might at
right?
other positions.
Yeah.
That might be a shortcut,
Yeah, I was
but
just thinking, can we have a
yeah,
shortcut?
that
I
might
don't.
be the shortcut for saying, okay, they've got my data says they've got issues here at running back and wide receiver, but according to PFF, their defense has 5 holes. They're really bad.
But I'm wondering, even say the lowest five in the DApps or
That's a
the highest
possibility.
five,
That's a
the
possibility.
extremes.
Yeah,
I'm wondering, how does your, so I'm saying we could start looking at your opportunity
I
in
like
those
that idea.
extremes.
Yeah.
You see, just kind of,
Well,
they don't
yeah,
need to fill these holes. Do they have, in other words, having a defense that seems to be working, i.e., it was really good last year or really bad, doesn't work. What does that do over time? And is the
yeah.
opportunity tracking, does that all track together? I think it does.
Well, there's an easy way to look at this because I can look back over the last couple of years that you have DAP data for.
Yes.
I can look at those bottom teams the
Yeah.
bottom,
Yeah.
let's say the bottom
Defense against position, by the way,
six teams,
for
whatever.
those that are
Correct.
not.
I can
Yeah.
look at the worst, the guys that are the absolute worst. Where did they concentrate
Yeah.
on in the next draft? Did they where were the first three rounds going?
Yeah.
Because this is where I'm really at is like fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh round picks. That's great. But and my data says that guys that are, you know, selected outside the top 100 are hitting at a pretty good rate anyway.
Yeah.
So, you know, that, you know, Tyler Algier, for instance, he had a great rookie year. He was a 151 in the draft. So
Yeah.
that's pretty low. And, you know, guys that have had success in the NFL
Yeah.
have not necessarily been the top draft picks. So, but looking at it that way, I'm like, yeah, are they going to
And
prioritize early?
efficiency might be a shortcut for the offensive side
Yeah, yeah,
since it
interesting. I like
measures,
that idea. I
yeah,
like that idea.
scoring per second, with yards and point. I mean, it's more the offensive side versus the DAP is the defense. I should probably get you the extremes, to see how
Yeah, that's
teams are going. Maybe
yeah,
I'll
I could
try to
easily
whip
do
that
that
out for you.
before the draft. Yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be a good idea. Good idea.
At least let's, I mean, the day I've got the data, if it can track for other things, then might as well use it, you know, for that.
Yeah, and the only way we know if it does is to look at it.
Well, you
Did
you look,
did they, you
you
know,
follow it.
where was
Yeah.
their yeah, where was the concentration? Where did they make their moves?
I'm
And
just
it's easy to
curious,
look back
is
at
there
free
some
agent. Yeah.
predictability? I'm just curious. I mean, imagine a team has a great defense and is very efficient, and has a early draft capital for whatever, they've been able to achieve that. I would think they're different than if a team has low efficiency, bad defense, low DAPS, and has low draft capital. I mean, I'm curious what they're going to do. I just wonder if some teams
Yeah.
their hands are tied. It's like, we got these anchors around us, and this is a multi-year fix here versus a few picks, and we could get healthy in this world. You know, the old
Yeah,
concept. I'm
yeah, and I
building my
think some
team concept.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and a lot of that's going to be hard to read, but
I
some
know.
of it is going to be
I mean, we're
one of those
talking
aha
advanced
moments, you
lessons
know.
here,
But
Dennis. And
oh
by the
God,
way,
yeah,
you and I
yeah,
talking through this, folks that are listening, we didn't. We're here now, folks. I didn't plan to be here until Dennis started talking, and it started me thinking about. He said he wanted to do opportunity. I said, why don't you grade it? If you grade it, we can start measuring it. We can start looking, and then, well, how do we try to get some more leverage on this? And then we started thinking PFF data or DAPS and I don't know if those are going to work or not, but that's, I think, how having people together, a group, allows you to go faster than by yourself. So again,
oh,
I think
definitely.
we've said that's where we're different. I don't know. In other words, on these podcasts, Dennis, have anybody ever saying, "Hey, let's do this metric. Let's add this." I mean, I haven't ever heard anything like that. They're just talking about, let me tell you what I
No,
think, or let me tell you how smart I'm going to be. This is my guy. This is the sleeper of the year. It's
yeah,
like, what the
and
hell is that? You know, I don't know. Anyway, don't get me going. But anyway, I think I'll get you
no,
that
and
data, and
that's
we'll start building. If you want to, Dennis, damn, we start doing so
no,
much. We
definitely,
need some
definitely,
interns,
no,
damn it.
no.
Yeah.
We need some interns, but
Yeah.
the what one of the interesting things that I've found, and this
Yeah.
again is a discovery that I've made that applies just to me.
Yeah.
Okay. It doesn't necessarily apply to everybody who is on this data journey. But even if I have a study that I'm doing, okay, that takes, okay, I know this is going to take 6 hours to complete.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I devote the next 6 hours to it,
No, no, no.
because I look at this stuff and I'll say, okay, I can do this for about an hour, and then I gotta take a break. And then when I come back, maybe I'm looking at something different for another hour.
Snacks,
That's
Dennis. Snacks.
that's
There is
the
data in parole hearings that before and after lunch, glucose on the
oh
brain
yes,
makes a big
yes,
difference in your decision making. Uh,
yeah,
they've tracked that. And the hangry concept
yeah.
is real. So you don't want to be doing your data, folks, when you're hangry. Okay, just don't. Go get you a
No,
burrito
no.
or something, get you a little snack, play with your dog or cat, go walking around and come back. Replenish that glucose in your brain and you'll think better. So, anyway,
And
anyway,
I do like, my brain works better when I focus for an hour on something, and then I take a break, go play with the dog, come back, focus an hour on something completely different, then take a break, then come back to the original thing I was working at in the beginning. It's not the most efficient way to complete one project,
yeah.
but it's very useful, because right now I've got about 5 projects that I'm working on for fantasy football, and I have one project I'm working on for work. So
Yeah.
you can see where my priorities lay.
Dennis, that damn work's getting in your way of doing
Just
extra
it
stuff.
does get in the way occasionally,
Yeah,
but
you need to tell your
but
boss you need some extra money here. This is getting away my fantasy football. Watch his face, and then let him know it's a joke. But
hey, I
you
had
should
an ex
video,
I
do
had
a
an
TikTok of
experience.
that. Yeah, go ahead.
So I had a famous experience of that back in the early days of the internet
Yeah,
at United Airlines, because I convinced them to get the internet at United in 1996, because I needed some data from San Francisco that you could only get off the internet.
yeah.
And of course, that season I started getting more into fantasy football,
Imagine that.
and the boss comes in,
Yeah,
professor. He comes in he calls me into his office, and he puts takes a printout and shoves it across the table at me, and he says, "Do you think this was smart?" And I look at it, and it was a trade,
yeah, yeah,
fantasy football trade, that somehow got triggered through our email
yeah,
system and showed up on his desk.
yeah. Nice.
And I looked at it and I said, "No, boss, it was a really dumb thing to do. But I'm really desperate at running back. I had to make
Yeah,
some sort of deal."
yeah,
He didn't see the humor in that.
yeah. I can
And
imagine.
he says, I was talking about doing fantasy football on office hours.
Yeah,
I said, oh, well, I misunderstood what you were saying. I won't do that again, boss.
yeah, yeah.
But, it was a bad trade.
Well, see, Dennis,
I gave up 3 pieces to get
as a
Emmett Smith, and then
graduate
Emmett Smith got
student,
hurt in the next game.
yeah, as a graduate student, when I started using the internet, nobody cared because we didn't have, you were expected to be there 24/7, sleep in the damn lab, get your ass to work.
Yeah.
So I would, I'd work midnight, 2, 3, go home, sleep, get up, do it. I mean, my apartment was take a shower. I'd eat lunches and supper at hospital food. I mean, as my PhD, I was 80 hours, 100 hours a week living in the lab, chained to my bench. They didn't care if 2 in the morning I wanted to go on the internet. And my first browser, Dennis, was called Mosaic. That was the first, before Netscape, it was
Yep.
Mosaic. And you were
Yep.
only supposed to
Yep.
search the internet at night because it was rude to take up government computer time at these sites you were going to. And basically, it was just all, date, it was all text and numbers, it wasn't movies and stuff, the And so they had horse racing was called the Derby list way back in the day, and I got it once a day, all the discussions, and that was a big deal in the 90s. And everybody's questions and discussion about data of the horses, and way back in the day. But it was rude to search during the day, so they didn't care, Dennis. So I had an advantage, Dennis. Nobody was looking over your shoulder on the internet, so I could
Yeah,
play
my
as I was. And then I had to learn stats. I mean, if you got into horse racing, you had to understand and train into multiple regressions. And that's just like, I need to get some stats here. I got to get ahead of this crap. So that's when I started learning stats. That's what drove me to it. I needed it for horse racing before I needed it for my upper level biology. So it all worked out. It was all good, Dennis, all good. Got to know those.
that's
Got
education,
to.
folks.
Yeah, yeah. It was our education
Edu-
back in the day, but Mosaic was the
gotta know.
browser. Yeah, people never heard of that unless you were back in the old days of the internet. We probably should start the show.
Yeah, you had to understand Pat Day's success,
Oh man, payday! I'm
on
telling
turf. You know,
you, yeah, payday.
it was incredible.
Boy, he
All
owned
right, here we
Oaklawn,
go,
Dennis.
Professor.
He owned Oaklawn.
Oh,
You could not
he
get
was a
any
monster.
odds. It was just that's how you'd have to handicap. Okay, is Day going to get his fifth, sixth winner, or is this? Do you take off, or is he just doing a favor? And there's not the horse is not live. You had, and trouble is he sneaked them in for an exacta or a trifecta on a dead
Yep.
horse. Somehow he'd make that horse
Oh
come
yeah.
alive, and you could get a little bit on a non-obvious horse. Yep. Payday.
Oh, just like old Calvin Bull
Borel.
Rail.
That's right. I
Many
remember that.
many years later
Yep.
would find a way to stuff a horse down on the rail and
Yep.
get that magic trip
Yep.
and get a piece of those trifectas as well.
Yep.
Yes, indeed. All right, here we go, Professor. How you doing, everybody? This is Dennis Michaels, and welcome to the science of fantasy football. Why the science of fantasy football? You get a meteorologist and a biologist together. They're going to use the scientific method, and that is ensuring that you're going to be better at fantasy football because you will just be better at handling statistics. And joining me as he does each and every week, he is a professor. He's the fantasy professor. It's John Bush. John, it is that exciting time of the year where we have so many great data studies going, and that's going to give us a leg up for the new year.
Well, our new year starts about August every year or so, I guess, or the preseason, because everybody starts finding the Hall of Fame players, those young players. They'll get them fitted for their jacket about that first preseason game. So I'll just say now, there's going to be players mentioned in the preseason that are going to burn people's drafts down, and they won't be what you think they are. So just be cautious. It's coming, and just like the draft and the combine, they got the next coming of whatever the poor man's Derrick Henry. We'll find him in the combine or whatever, and it's going to be comical to watch all of it, and that's good because that means that the ADPs and things, the value will come to us, Dennis. The all the riches, fame, and fortune we will collect, right? No, but I'll help make me a little money again, and I'm looking forward to this process. And it always happens every year, just like the first week of the season. It's just everybody's going to go crazy all the time. So I'm here for it. But we got data to talk about here today, so we will be doing that. I don't have any gripes, anything. Life is good here, February 22nd. Uh, I'm retired now from teaching and researching at the university for 30 years, so it's all gravy for a while. I do need my Saints, Dennis. We need to talk about the referee fix. Kansas City's about had all those scripts in their favor. We need to come back down to the Big Easy. And some of my Saints fans, we need another Drew Brees or something. We need something. We need the second broom closet in the Hall of Fame for another Saints victory. So that's what we're playing for this year. So I'm ready. I'm ready. It's a new year, Dennis. It's all going to be good for my Who Dat boys.
It is a new year, but we're already seeing people falling in to the same old traps when it comes to predicting this rookie class. And
Yep.
I've got my opinions on the rookie class. I'm not excited about any of the quarterbacks in this class. That doesn't mean that one or two won't go on to be great NFL quarterbacks. It just means there's too much uncertainty. I'm not excited about the guy I'm most excited about didn't look all that great in college. He's got all those fundamental skills, and more importantly, he can run with the football. A guy by the name of Jackson Dart from Ole Miss. And he looks like he could be the guy I'll take a couple of chances on in fantasy football. There's running backs galore that I love in this draft. I think there's about 7 running backs that, depending on where they go in the draft, who they land with, what the opportunity is that they could get presented with in their first couple of years in the NFL, could be really good fantasy football running backs. There's about 3 or 4 wide receivers that I'm looking at. The tight end class that is getting so heralded, in my opinion, I think these are going to be better real NFL tight ends, meaning blocking is going to be something they do very well. I'm not so sure any of them are going to be great fantasy football tight ends in their first couple of seasons in the league. But you notice a tone that I took in everything I said there. I talked in a lot of could be's and I thinks. I got into a little bit of a tussle. I was called an idiot on Twitter this week.
I'm shocked.
When a guy,
I'm shocked.
really, I'm stunned that I would be called names on fantasy football Twitter. It only happens every day, folks. But what I responded to that got me called that is somebody gave a list of his players at quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. There weren't many of them. And he said, that is it. Those are the elite players, and anything else, any other player that you pick is wrong. These are the guys. These are the ultimate guys. He's saying that before the combine, before the draft, before you know where these players are going to be playing. And the key was, he said, nobody else is going to matter. And I responded to that. I shared it. And I said, interesting list. Probably will be wrong on 1 to 3 of these players. And I would think that 1 to 3 more players not listed will end up being good at fantasy football. I didn't say this list is garbage. I got called an idiot for having that opinion when I said it was way too early to be speaking in that specific of a tone. And I was told I was an idiot. I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to rookies. Okay. What's your track record? So I started looking back at this person and what they had said. Professor, they got 3 guys, 3 rookies already this year that they're talking about being generational talents. How can you have 3 generational talents in one draft at the same position. It's changing the meaning of the word generational. When I think generational, I think best in the next of the last 20 years, or at least 15 years, or at least 10 years. And this guy's coming up with 3 generational talents at running back in this year's draft. It's possible one of those 3 will be very, very good. But he's basically saying 3 guys you can already measure for jackets for the Hall of Fame. And I got called stupid and an idiot. I don't know how we have gotten so careless with throwing the word generational talent out all the time. When you start using a term too frequently, that term loses all power. I just don't get it, but maybe I don't understand. Maybe generations are turning over a lot quicker, because when I think generation, Professor, I think about 20 years.
So definitions, Dennis, we've talked about that. I know multiple podcasts. Uh, Again, we have an expert problem in fantasy. We don't have a scientific society that sets definitions. I assure you, climatologists have a society, uh, molecular biologists have a society, and they have language is established. We know what the definition of a gene is. We understand that this means that, and so everybody in that arena does that. We don't have that. So that means anybody can flip on Twitter and say anything about any term and be right, because they, after the fact, well, to me, generation means the last 100 years. Okay. If you have a society, you have experts, you have data scientists, PhDs, these kind of things, they determine a generation. I mean, if you're talking breeding, it's probably 18 to 20 years, right? For fertility, maybe 13, 12. I mean, back when we only lived to 24 years, back 10,000 years ago, a generation might be 10 years, maybe 5, because, the woolly mammoths were goring people and the saber tooths were picking off the weak. And the weak was 18 or 19. You were old back then, Dennis. Can you imagine? And you had to be really generational to beat a saber tooth back to the cave. Let me tell you, there's the selection to become a generational runner 10,000 years ago. Whew, you had to be swift, or you had to stab your neighbor in the leg and let them get eat, right? So you had to be kind of smart. You had to use your brain or use your legs. But generational, there is no definition. Sleeper, bust. What are some of the others we've used over there? Sleeper. Best thing ever, worst thing ever.
To the
I don't
moon.
to the moon. Yeah, this is their season. I don't. What does stupid
Yeah.
mean, right? In
My
fantasy, what
my
does stupid
guy.
ask?
My
Let's
guy.
ask fantasy receipts what they would consider a stupid tweet. I'd be curious about their definition. We'll get them involved. Could they define stupid for us or idiot in fantasy? I bet they would have quite the. You should probably, uh, you know, uh, text them or tweet them and ask them. We're curious about, based on what you've seen on the tweets over the years, is there a definition for stupid or idiot or sleeper or bust? What does that mean? And just watch them. I bet they'll have something funny to say. So we should probably do that, Dennis. So anyway,
Yeah, that's a good idea. And I guess what I'm getting at, Professor, is that, you know, and you're right. The biggest problem is we have so many self-proclaimed experts in this field. I've been playing fantasy football. I've been winning at fantasy football for a lot of years. I don't consider myself an expert. I haven't figured this game out completely yet. Have I done it better than a certain percentage of the population? Probably. I'm a fantasy football data researcher. I if somebody else wants to call me an expert, that's up to them. But I won't go around calling myself an expert, even though I probably have an advanced knowledge of the game of fantasy football versus the average Joe on the street, or even the average self-proclaimed fantasy football analyst. But you won't hear me calling myself an analyst. But here's where we differ from the population, and I think differ in a positive way. It doesn't matter that I've had 15 winning seasons in a row in fantasy football, and that's graded on ROI, folks. I've got a positive return on investment 15 years in a row. That's a good thing. That eliminates good luck, because I am not that lucky in normal life. My betting account in horse racing could prove that real quick. So I must understand the game. But the reason we understand the game, I've got 6 studies going right now, Professor,
yeah.
on 6 different things in fantasy football, and they'll all be completed and probably be completed in time for the draft season coming up. I'm not jumping in any best ball drafts yet.
Yeah. No.
I will wait and see what's going on. I will wait and see how ADP evolves, because that is going to determine who my top guys are. I want this year at quarterback. I'll state it for the record. I want somebody in my top 7 that is the least expensive. And if I can get 2 of my top 7 at a reasonable price, first 8 rounds of the draft, I can get 2 of those guys in, let's say, rounds 4 to 8 this year. I'm going to be pleased. I want one of my top 4 tight ends. I understand I'm going to have to pay up for that, but I'll try to get the least expensive of my top 4. And then everything else will be best player available, because there's lots of talent available. There's lots of elite players available, guys that can have and I'm going to define elite in fantasy football as guys that help your team each and every week. So 14 out of 17 weeks, they had a positive.
That's pretty good,
that's
Dennis.
huge. They had a 14 out of 17 weeks. They did not hurt your team. They scored close enough or above the historic median. And if I can get that 14 out of 17 weeks, I'll be ecstatic. There's like 5 or 6 of those guys at running back and wide receiver, each position. I want one of those guys at each position. If I can have 2, I'm thrilled. But that is the kind of guy. And I'm just talking guys that don't throw a horrible number at you in 14 of 17 weeks. And there's guys out there that do that.
The
I'm not
best
talking
tight
about
end,
guys that score 20 points.
yeah, last year, Dennis, the best tight ends were maybe 7 or 8 weeks out of 16.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So tight ends are way
I'm
different.
talking running back and wide receiver.
It's different than, so
yes.
you can't draft them the same that you do your other ones.
No.
Yeah,
no, I agree with that wholeheartedly. You've got to set your position targets, what you expect out of that player, you have to set it different at tight end versus wide receiver versus running back. I'm I would like to have an advantage at every position. In other words, I want one of those really good guys. I want one of them at wide receiver, one of them at running back, one at quarterback, one at tight end. And I think I can achieve that in most drafts. Now, if I get two of the top running backs, I'm going to have to give up somewhere else. I understand that. But I think I can have one of my top guys that I expect at each position and do that in enough drafts to be happy. And it's all about understanding when to pull the trigger on quarterback and tight end.
Nice.
But understanding that theory in the draft is where it's at. But so I'm talking MVPs over 100. And that's what I want. I want one running back, one wide receiver whose MVP score there is over 100. That's an elite level in fantasy football. And those guys are going to be pleasing me 14 out of the weeks of the year because I set the bar a lot lower. If I'm saying I want their worst weeks to be 7 or 8 points. And there's guys that exist like that in the NFL. Quarterback, tight end, that's a whole different story there, but there's ways around that. But one of the studies I'm working on, Professor, I'm curious to get your opinion of this.
Okay.
Because it's something I've used for rookies going to their second year to project how much better they're going to get in that second year.
Right.
I'm a big believer that it's tough playing in the NFL. Is that a pretty fair statement?
Yes.
And much tougher to play in the NFL than it is at college.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I think it takes guys a while to learn the pro game, even when they're in the starting lineup. And my data studies for the past have suggested that the last 6 games of the season for a rookie, if they do exceptionally well in those last 6 games,
yep,
they're probably going to have a pretty good second year in the league. And when I say pretty good, if they're MVP for those 6 games, and I understand that's a small data sample,
yep,
but if their MVP is over 100, I'm pretty confident they are going to score over 80 for their next season. And I have seen it happen time and time again. I've seen the Amon-Ra St. Browns of the world who did really good at the end of his rookie season. He came out gangbusters in season 2.
mm-hmm.
And that's the way I like to grade my rookies. My question for you, mm-hmm. is that a fair way to grade players that might have not had the greatest of last seasons who are veterans? If they finish strong like that, mm-hmm. do we have the same level of confidence that they're going to have a improved season the following year? I'm not sure. I want to do a little more research on it.
Couple things. One, and I don't know what position that is coming to mind, but I have found when I've looked at the year before and what did it predict about the next year in rookies, I have found where in year 2 that there are one flavor that rookies come on really well and proceed the next year really good. I've also found another population that doesn't have a great first year, but come on in the second and do really well. Usually, if they don't have good in first and second seasons, it is a more rare to pop up third, fourth years. Just kind of, and I can't say what position, but I remember when I was looking at that, I like to look at those kind of metrics. And that's what I remember, that I was surprised. I was just, my thought was, well, if you weren't coming out the gate strong first year, then probably, I don't expect in year three for you to still be there. And that's not right. If they have a good second year, yeah, if they have a bad first, bad second, yes, you probably should be very skeptical. But if they have a good first or second, and I think I even found where they had a good first, they had an second, but they rebounded. That does happen. There's something. It's streaky. It's like horses, right, Dennis? 2-year-old, they have a couple good races, and then maybe they get injured or they go on the shelf, and they come back and they don't do anything till maybe the next year or something, the third year, versus a third year they start peaking, versus a horse that second, third year hadn't done anything. It's probably rare their fourth year that they wake up and are a champion. I'm sure it happens. I bet you John Henry or some of those old timey, like, dirt to turf horses would wake up with a different situation. So maybe if somebody sucks year one and two, but they go to a new team or a new scheme, maybe you could give them some doubt. I haven't checked that deep in the data, so it's not an absolute, folks. But if I'm betting, I'm probably betting. I got to have value if they sucked year one and two for me to take them, in year three high. Something's got to be going their way. I need a story, Dennis, or something. I need you to tell me something that's changed. But that's what I remember about that. As far as the last six, I'm assuming you're defining not week 18, right? Right? I mean, you're really talking
No. Last
17
six
back.
games played. Yeah,
But I'm saying some play week
correct. Last
18.
six games played.
But I would, I
You
would,
know, I'm
I would
I'm
probably
allowing
throw. Okay, you take week 18 then. Is that what you're saying? And that's
I'm
fine. I'm not.
allowing it. I'm
Yeah,
allowing it, but I'm not sure.
but
Like I
realize a lot
need
of funky things
if
can
I'm looking
happen.
at oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not really sold on week 18, but I'm not putting a blanket finish on it because if both teams playing that day
Yeah.
needed a win in
Yeah.
week 18 to stay in the playoff hunt, then week 18 will be as representative
But
as
you've
any
got to
other
go
week
into the
in the season.
data and make
And
that
I
call.
always yeah,
Yeah.
you got to make that call. So I'm saying okay, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that if they were active week 18, that there was something on the line, that there was a reason that they were playing. But the guys that I've spot checked so far, it's interesting because if I go back to the end of the 2023 season,
Uh-huh.
last six games played by
Uh-huh.
CJ Stroud, and this did not include week 18,
Uh-huh.
but the last six games played, he had an MVP of 67
Not good. That's
versus
that's a
his
QB too.
complete season where he was
Yeah.
only 73.3. That's
That's
why I was
still a.
out.
I'm
That's
yeah. I'm
I
not
wasn't I,
excited about him.
I wasn't excited about CJ Stroud last year because of that figure.
Dennis, I didn't
And
draft him at all in my
I owned
40 something leagues. I didn't
not
do
at
it.
it, not at his ADP. He
Nope.
was
Nope.
gone by QB5 in every draft I went in.
And I missed
His
him. Yep.
his MVP for the season last year, 31.3.
That's
That's
QB3.
awful.
That's QB3,
That's awful.
Dennis.
And now it doesn't mean that he's going to be that awful next year.
But
But
boy,
when I
I'd want some price break if I'm grabbing him. It's my
so
one
I
this year.
picked 10 so I
Yeah,
picked 10 quarterbacks at random that I was just curious
yeah.
about. So just spot checking the data, and I need to do more.
Uh-huh.
I 10 is not enough. But how about this?
Yeah.
In 10 for 10 from 23 to 24, if they did much worse in those last 6 games,
Yeah.
they dropped between 23 and 24. If they did much better in those last 6 games, they performed better from 20 to 24. And if they were close, there didn't seem to be, some were up, some were down.
Right.
Only 10 players, not enough to make any definitive word on it, but enough to say, I need to do more research on this. Maybe this is a tool. And one of the guys that comes in much higher in his last 6 games
Yeah.
than his complete season in 24
Yeah.
is Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
That makes me curious on whether he is going to be better in 25 than he was at 24. Of course, he'll probably still be too expensive ADP for me to want to invest in him. That's the part we don't know yet. But when I look at players and I look at where they went, guys like Josh Downs, his last 6 games in 23, he scored about a 75 in MVP. He was 26.7 for the complete year. Last year, he was a 71.4. Still not great, but a big improvement. So we kind of think maybe he'll have another bump this season. A guy that that I liked, Michael Pittman. He had a lower MVP in his last 6 games than his total MVP. What did his MVP do last year? It went down considerably. So I'm going to look at this last 6 games of the season,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just going to be studying it
Mm-hmm.
for 23 into 24. See how the result was, because I've got the data. I can do the calculations pretty quick. And let's see if it's better than, if it's a good indicator, then I'll put it to use from 24 to 25. It won't be the only thing I look at, but it'll be one of those indicators that, yeah, maybe this is something we need to look at. Maybe that finish in the season
Mm-hmm.
is more important than how he did the complete season. And then maybe there's a reason for that. Did the team also add rookies at other positions that might be impacting his performance? Even if the guy's been in the league 5, 6 years,
Right.
is the supporting cast around him better? And will that supporting cast be with him the following year? Those are things that we can easily look at when we look at the rosters from year to year. So just an interesting study that I sort of stumbled across recently that
Yeah.
makes me want to do a little more research on it before I'm ready to make definitive claims. But the one thing I'll guarantee that I won't be doing is
Mm-hmm.
calling 3 to 5 players generational talents
Yeah.
in every draft.
Yeah. I have the weekly data back to 2013. So it would be, in other words, we can do that. We can do a pivot table, and I can combine the last 6 versus overall. You could get a percentage increase, or with the Bush number. We could do that. Down the road. I have that data for us to look at. Dennis, I think let's do some some data hunting here. What do you think? You want to see some stuff?
Absolutely. I want to see
Yeah.
some new data.
Yeah. Let me find what I'm doing here. This is okay, this quarterback. Let me go to I want to finish up some tight end work that I think did I Dennis, I got so much stuff here. Damn it. Okay, get this. Just so folks, I'm not, I didn't have it all laid out. So that's why you got to listen to us a little bit here. Because let's see, where did my data go? Yeah. Okay, is this okay? This is still tight. Okay, so I have uh two ways to look at the Bush figure now. I talked a little bit about principal component analysis, and I showed you that the last segment of the week, the 145th or lower, was inverse to the other slices. The top 48, the next 48, the next 48 were actually positive. And so I had an equation that popped out. Uh, Here it is, the standardized number, and basically use that to uh, look at the data that I've generated. And I've got the what I call Bush linear regression number. Versus the old days, I just looked at the top 48, Dennis, number of weeks per games played, how many times were in the top 48. So you get a lot of positive, you don't get a lot of negative. So the linear regression is going to penalize players that are hurting you, right? You've had that concept of, kind of the hits or misses concept, the ones that have, how many weeks they wreck your team. And the Bush figure, the LR version includes that. But the original slice data is only positive. And this is the distribution over the years, Dennis, from 2013 here. And some years there's basically no box. In other words, everybody sucks so bad, it's so close to zero that
Wow.
look at that. So that was really when I looked at that, I was like, I haven't seen that. So that was interesting. And if you plot the complete numbers, it's almost an exponential uh, distribution, and then they're basically zero. That means no weeks in the top 48. So we have a lot of tight ends from over the 12 years that gave you zero. I mean, a lot of these are blocking tight ends, and you probably wouldn't have them anyway. But I just like to look. But it's not linear, folks. So for you to pick and draft assuming it's linear is not right. And I haven't had time to try to figure out, Dennis. I mean, can you imagine point 0.7? That would have meant, what is that,
Wow.
17? That's 11 weeks or 12 weeks in the top 48. It hadn't been recently
Whew.
that we've had some tight ends. I don't know if it's Jermichael Finley and Gates or, Greg Olson. Some of these old timers might have been in here, right? So last year, uh, Hiddle was about point 0.5. So we haven't seen any of these kind of generational players in a long time that have been able to give you, other than anything above 8 weeks. And that is so rare. Look at that. We're talking each dot is a player, Dennis. There's not many. This is 40%, 30%. So, but there's the distribution. It's not linear. So this elite concept, Dennis, is probably more valuable than you think within tight ends. I mean, I think people know that, but I don't think they have a way to visualize it. And when you see an exponential kind of distribution, you can go from here. Look at this here at, three and a half, 0.35 to 7. Wow. That's double. I mean, Dennis, the impact of having this player, we haven't, like I say, we haven't seen one of these players, but if next year, if McBride is a point 0.7, can you imagine everybody else could be down in here? You, you would own that. I mean, he could probably win your league for you in a tight end premium, Dennis. I mean, that's what's on the table, something like that. So that's that. When I looked
Well,
at, oh, go ahead.
here's something I see in the here's something I see in the pattern here
Yeah.
is, yeah, we're looking at the top end, and that's the ultimate and very rare. I
Generational.
mean, we've only had like 5 seasons that were
Yes.
above point
Point
0.6
six.
in this
Yes.
data. But if I look at this pattern, I look at anything above point 0.4.
Oh,
Look
yeah.
how rare that is.
It's
Look
rare.
look how more how it gets so much more crowded as you get down to about 0.25.
Yep.
So if I've got a guy who is at zero point 0.4 versus 0.25,
Big difference.
that's a
Impact wise.
huge, huge advantage. And of course, if he has a season like Kittle did,
Yep. Point
that's
0.5.
even greater.
Yep.
But now, if he is at an ADP
Oh, yeah.
where the rest of the population is 0.25 or less,
Yep.
and you're getting that zero point 0.5 guy at that same cost,
Yeah. Boy, that's gravy.
that's where you've really made out like the proverbial bandit. So our goal is to find those guys that can have the breakout, but the breakout is closer to zero point 0.4 than it is to what Kittle did last year. So we've got room in the data to take advantage of that situation. And last year there were, like 3 guys that might fit that profile, and that worked out pretty good. So because not all of them were the most elite cost at tight end, and that's the key. If
Yep.
you could get that last of the elite, and you could do it consistently enough, and maybe you have to pay a half a round ahead of ADP to do that,
Mhm.
you can lay out your draft in such a way to accomplish
I
that
mean, look at the
goal.
steepness. Now, I'm going to show you the linear regression where you put in the penalty of being sucky for sucky weeks, and this is the distribution.
Ooh.
Yeah, you're negative, but you, in other words, I'm tracking these negatives where over here you weren't tracking the zero. I mean, you can't get any worse than zero, and so the distribution looks less steep, Dennis. So it's a different distribution of the metrics here. So I haven't decided what that means yet for us, but it's different. So we're going to see players differently with these two metrics. I don't know, is this better because it's so steep? Does it just slap you in the head? This looks a little bit, almost linear at a certain. I mean, it's like a composite trend. It's like we're exponential, and then at some point we start going linear. In other words, it's very complex distribution. It's not it's not linear. It's not exponential. This is exponential. That's not. So I thought that was interesting. And again, us looking differently than what people are looking at. That's the We hope the advantage is going to come when we look at ADPs and whatnot. So I haven't quite finished. I kind of ran out of time because I decided that I had to go back and look at it this way. I wanted to look at it this way. I just wanted to see these before. So I did that. And I did talk about, this, that green, to, in other words, in the top 25% using the LR, and it's like 50% that were green last year were green again. So there's a lot of attrition, Dennis. There's a lot of landmines here. It's not like this is a guarantee because almost half were green last year in top good. They sucked. So you realize that every other step you could fall in the hole, right? Versus non-green last year to green 5%. So you don't have to worry about the other error. In other words, I'm missing a great player. Most likely you're 95%, you're not. When you step, it's probably not a hole with these guys, but with here, it's 50-50. And I did the double green, and it's about 50-50. In other words, 2 years, and then the third year, it wasn't any different. Tight ends are really strange that way because quarterbacks are a little better for us, Dennis. I've got the data coming that if we get a chance, I'll show. But our tight ends so far are something different. So we've got this distribution of the two figures are different and populations are different. And, what happened last year, if you just are a slave to it, you're going to, like I said, 50-50, flip a coin. And of course, now with this, Dennis, when I say green, I didn't distinguish the top 10% versus next year. I mean, you could go back and, you could define that throughout, and I might do that if I have time. So when I say you think you're done, you're not done. But imagine they were fairly elite last year. How are they this year? I haven't done that because 25% in tight ends, Dennis, if you look at these distributions, is pretty far down there, you see. So if you're only getting the elite of the elite, what did they, if they were great last year, like Kittle was over time, over the, 2013 on, how are these super elites, let's call them super, how did they do the next year? So I probably need to rerun this, but tighter, just for us. I will do that. So it's like you're never done with it, Dennis. Every time I go through here, I start thinking I need to plow back through here. This is getting really deep for me. Usually I'm kind of like a bee hitting the flower, moving on. And boy, I'm getting every pollen grain out of that sunflower, Dennis. And so you got to have patience. Even my dog doesn't have patience. But anyway, what you think about all
Huge,
that I just talked about?
yeah, yeah, huge differences from one year to the next when you look at even the best of the best at tight end. Using my MVP number,
Yeah,
Kittle went from 56.3
yeah.
to 121.4.
Man, that's big.
Jonnu Smith went from 23.1 to 115.4.
Wow.
Trey McBride, the only other tight end over 100 last year in MVP,
Yeah,
92.3 to 106.3. So he had an increase, but a lot smaller. You look at, the fourth best tight end that had a full season was at 94.1. That was Brock Bowers. Then it dropped down to 70, then 64, 62, 53, and then all the way down to 25.
yeah,
It is such a top heavy population. And here's the thing,
yeah,
if we drafted Kittle last year
yeah,
at ADP cost,
yeah.
of what that 56.3 represented.
Yeah.
We got a better player. We didn't expect the 121.4. If we drafted Jonnu Smith above that, just shortly above that, what 23.1 would cost you in ADP,
Yeah.
we were correct, but we didn't expect to get the 115. I mean, you get paid off for being right at tight end to the extreme.
Yeah.
And that's the interesting thing here is we were right about Kittle. We were right about Jonnu Smith. We weren't right that we expected them to be 1 and 2, but we expected them to far exceed their cost, and they did. And then they rewarded us by having that magical season. Trey McBride didn't, he was still at 92.3. We're drafting him at a position in the draft that said he was a bargain. And he did pay off as an elite guy. But that's because people didn't believe the 92.3. Yeah. Now, will Jonnu Smith go back to 115 this year? I doubt it. But if we only have to draft him at a level of 70 on MVP, and he outperforms that, then we're still in the positive. But boy, looking at this population at tight end, there aren't a lot of great tight ends out there.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's just, I've got the data, and what I'm going to do is, and I've done this for quarterback, but I hadn't put it up here for tight end. I'm going to look at both metrics, and I'm going to let you see the top 25% in both, and we could compare and see who's good in one, not so good in the other. And I've got that for quarterback, Dennis. And so before we leave tight end, and we'll probably revisit this one more time, and then I promise we'll move on. But I will get you because I have scaled this data here, this Bush LR versus the slice Bush. I've got them on a scale of 1 to 100, and I can give that to you, and you can throw in your MVP, ADP, whatever, and we'll start building our 6, 7 metric, maybe even more this year, and we'll be able to start catching. I think we'll catch more than like we did last year when we combined everything. Nobody, most likely, we won't miss a lot. We'll miss some, but I'm hoping we'll miss less than everybody else. So we'll beat them. Like I said, we'll beat that consensus. I'm telling you, we're looking at it way different than nobody's looking at it like I'm looking at it. So here it is, Dennis. And again, the 2 or 3 that are listening to us, thanks, guys. I hope we're giving you that advantage time it's all said and done. And like I told our friend Rick last night, I said, most people, they just want the fire, Dennis. They don't want to learn about an axe and how to cut a tree down, how to sharpen it, how to keep it, what trees to cut, all that. Forget that, Dr. Bush. Just give me what's on the test. Those kids, they'll sit there and grin at me like a big Chester cat. Dr. Bush, we just want to know what's on the test. Get me in medical school and then I'll study. Oh, good. I want you to operate on my daughter. Oh, yeah. You're the surgeon I want. I'll learn it later. Let me get in and I'll learn it later. Don't worry, Dr. Bush. I'll catch up. No, I want these brainiacs that are eating and breathing this stuff day one. They're burning to be a surgeon. That's the ones I want. Of course, they're probably won't be hanging around Arkansas, Dennis. They'll be in the big cities making the big bucks. So we get the hillbilly doctors, right? The hoodoo root doctors, little moonshine. Call me in the morning. Take a shot, little honey in it. Call me in the morning. Little turpentine, give a little spike there. Get your body going. We had that hill medicine up here, Dennis. I don't know what y'all have up there, but that hill
Oh,
medicine, you know, but there's always a
well,
lot of alcohol involved in the snake oil. Don't always, pickled snakes.
the,
Okay, go ahead, Dennis. I'm sorry. I shouldn't tease you.
this discussion, this discussion reminds me of a seventh grade teacher that I had, Mr. Jacobson,
Yeah,
and he would give us these complex problems every Friday.
yeah,
He would give us this complex problem that we had to decipher.
yeah.
And one of them, of course, Gilligan's Island was on in reruns
Yeah. This is
when
back
we
in
were
the
in
day.
seventh when I was in seventh grade. Yeah. So he said, what if you got marooned on a desert island and all you had was an axe? What would be the first thing that you did? And went around, everybody had to come up with an answer, and people were saying I'd gather firewood, I'd gather coconuts, I'd do this, I'd do that. It got to me, and professor, I said, well, I may be wrong, but I'd probably spend that first half hour sharpening my axe.
Yeah.
And the class looked at me and I was like,
What?
that's what you have to do
Yeah.
if you're in a situation is you got to get your tools ready.
Yeah.
And that was the first thing that came to my mind. And that's what we're doing with our data is sharpening the axe so
Yeah.
we could cut some wood and
Yeah.
build that hut,
No.
in
Dennis,
our
just tell me
fantasy
what's going to
football
be on the
data.
test. Just give me your list so I can drink a couple six packs before I go to my draft in August. Come on, Dennis. Just sell me for $10, right?
Now,
It didn't take you long. Come on.
now, now I was good in college
Yeah.
of going back through the files that were kept by all of the fraternities and sororities
Oh, yeah.
on what was on the test
Yeah.
from professor, this professor, that professor. I learned real quick when I got down to Purdue to find that data.
Yeah.
So,
Well, my test
but
was
no,
so damn
great.
hard that I didn't have to worry because I would tell my students, these essay, because I didn't give them true false multiple choice. I said that's kiddie stuff. This, I was teaching seniors, and I mean these people, and I said that's candy land. This is the real world, folks. So you're gonna do essays, and they're rolling their eyes. I said, but don't worry. I don't know the answer to these damn questions either. So we're all going to be learning stuff. And they're looking at me. They don't like that kind of talk. So they don't like it when I said, I don't know the answers to these damn questions. Anyway, Dennis, let me do a little bit of quarterback. You and I have been chattering way too long because we're having way too much. Because this is my happy time of the year doing data, right? The drudgery is trying to stay on the weekly stuff, the same old stuff on Twitter, the breakouts, the bust, same old crap. This is fun stuff here. So I did the distribution of the quarterback and all slices. Uh, the three slices are relevant to that. So the good news is they all point to one factor. And you're saying, well, what does principal? If I used all sorts, like for instance, if we did the Bush factor, MVP, calm, Vegas, whatnot, and we put it through a principal component analysis, it would show are all these measuring the same component or it's not. The best thing, Dennis, would be that our MVP measures something different than say the Bush. That would be great. Probably not going to happen, but it might. And having this number means that we could determine the relationship uh, of that, who's better and what is the direction. So it turned out that the last slice, 145 and up, it didn't even compute. It was so bad. So if a quarterback is not in the top 96, you're hurting. So it started getting negative at the 97th to 144th in the week. So the equation was a little different. And so for the linear regression model. And overall, here's the average linear regression for each year. This is 2013 here. This is last year, Dennis, and this is that the weighted average, and just looking here, and it's not like tight ends. It's a little different on the distribution here. So it's really some extremes. Look at 2014, the worst, and the best was what, 2023 with this number. Okay. And look at last year. Boy, we really flopped, one of the worst in the last 12 years, for a third worst. So we went from the best to the worst, one of the worst last year, Dennis. So that's interesting. I wonder if people caught that. I don't know if that's injury or what that is. But anyway, there's that data. And if you look at the distribution, notice the whisker is 0.22, the 0.8. I mean, that tight ends are never that way. So this is way different than the tight ends, Dennis, here. And here is the tight end greater than zero. That's with the linear. And then here's quarterback. Notice it
Wow.
goes different. Look, we're measuring here and in here. So completely different. Different. It cannot be drafted the same. Cannot be thought of the same. We're different that way, Dennis. So people shouldn't. They should be handled differently. The distribution is different. Sure is. I'm stopping. Let
And
you.
that makes a lot of sense when I look at it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because the population is much smaller
Yes.
at the top end for tight end versus quarterback. For instance, using my MVP, I'm showing the same thing because I showed 7 quarterbacks over 100 on MVP, which I consider 100 is my elite level. There are
My
only three
seven
tight
beat
ends.
above point 0.6. So I've got
Yeah,
seven above point 0.6. Look at the tight end. I've got four above point 0.4.
that is tight. That is
Yeah.
tight.
Yeah.
And the drop off is more severe at tight end than at
Look at
quarterback
that. And it's
as
still,
well.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then drop again. So we have kind of a
And my
plateau
MVP,
here.
yeah.
So that's
Yeah,
interesting.
My MVP is showing the exact same thing that the once you get to a certain level at tight end, they all are pretty similar. There's
But
a huge glut of pretty
then they
similar
drop again.
before the big drop. Yeah.
Yeah. So
There
you don't want to be waiting too long.
no,
We're
no.
talking the
And you
25th.
definitely
Yeah.
oh
It's lean after that. The top 25, 24. you know, it's starting to get lean right in there.
and that's over an 11-year period. So you're
Yes.
talking a pretty small population. You're probably talking once you get lower than the tight end six,
Yeah.
it's becoming very ordinary after
Yeah.
that point. So you need to have an elite tight end option, is what this data is saying. At quarterback, that population
I mean, other
of
than these two,
other than the
some of
really
these,
extreme,
you got the
yes,
top seven. If you get in here, you're not anywhere. I mean, you're beating or competitive with everybody except for two people in your league.
yeah, yeah, and
It,
that's
yeah.
where I think that
Yeah.
you could be a little you can wait a
There's
little
some
longer at
slack.
quarterback.
You got slack.
And then if you look at the weekly distribution of scores, again, I get back to that theory that we really discovered. We stumbled into it last year if you are, it makes sense to take two shots at quarterback.
Yeah.
If I can have two of the top 12
Yeah.
that I've got rated,
Yeah.
I'll be in better shape at tight end. I want the elite guy, and I want, I'm going to have to pay. I'm going to have to pay a premium price, but maybe that means I don't go for the tight end one or two. I try to get tight end three or four
Yeah.
because
So,
they're a little better value.
so I went back to the slice method. Just I was curious about the first through 48th and the 49th through 96 because the data says these are the only ones that are positive. And I looked at the difference. So I plotted that. And I mean, clearly the top 48 is always above the next peer over the year, the average of the top 48. So that's good. But there are some years, Dennis, that they're close, and some years they're not. So, it's not like these are always at a certain distance. There's variation. Look at 2016, the top 48 are almost the same as the next. So the late quarterback phenomenon started maybe 2014, they were almost the same. So these
Yep.
adherents
Yep.
to the late, it's all good if it's that. What happens if it's 2017? It's a clear distinction. Or look at 18. A little close last year, maybe the year before. So just realize when you pick like, oh, I'm always doing late quarterbacks, it depends on how, your diary. Are you good at that? Can you find the Baker Mayfield that you can pick him as your one? And yeah, if you grab him, but imagine you got, say, Dak, and he got it. I mean, I know injury, but still, he wasn't 100. He wasn't doing what I thought he was going to do, even when he was playing. But that kind of thing. So there are years where they're almost the same. There are years that they're big difference here. So I just wanted to remind myself that fantasy football has more variation than we like. That's why when you say sleepers, bust, generational talent, I think you ignore the variation that's cooked into all this, and people should not do that, Dennis. Bad. So I don't know if you want to talk about
And,
this.
and I can make a case that I don't want the guys that are showing previous valleys, peaks and valleys.
Yeah.
And the same thing in horse racing. Okay. If if I'm looking at a horse race
Yeah.
and I'm betting a horse that's say 5-2 or 2-1 on the
Mm-hmm.
board,
Yeah.
I don't want him to have a 102, 60, 92 buyers in his last three races. I want him to be really consistent.
Yeah.
And if you look at a guy like Dak's gone from 22 season, it was 75 on my MVP.
Yeah.
Then he jumped up to um, to a 94
Yeah.
in 23, and then down to a 42.9 last year.
Yeah.
That's variability that I don't really want to be aiming for versus maybe, you know, like I'm looking at Jalen Hurts. He goes 140, 125, 107. I don't like the trend, you know, but I like the end result, but I'm not crazy about the trend. So I'm going to maybe stay away from him. But, you look at these huge swings in MVP, you know, Baker Mayfield minus 36 to a 64 to a 129 in the last 3 years. What does 2025 hold in store? I don't know.
Yeah.
That's so much variability. You're really not sure what he's going to do.
This did as I did for you. The question was, how did Patrick Mahomes look over his time? Last 12 years, he's the best by this metric. 8 years,
Interesting.
0.681. Andrew Luck, boy, we missed something there. 0.642 than Josh
Oof.
Allen.
Yeah.
So we, in this year, we had the privilege of seeing some of the best quarterbacks that have been in the last 12 years. Kyler Murray, Herbert, Lamar Jackson, even Russell Wilson. They crack on him, but, Joe Burrow, you know, there's some interesting players that is here versus some that you'd be like, oh wow, Eli Manning, 0.27. Ooh. This is overall, Dennis. This is all their overall big, their playing time. So I thought you'd like to see where some of these players ranked out. It was interesting to me that Mahomes. I mean, I thought he's going to come up pretty high, but I didn't know he'd come out number one overall. How
Yeah,
about that?
that's pretty crazy to see him on top there. That's some
With this
consistency that you
metric,
like seeing.
with
Yeah, with
this metric.
this metric.
Yeah.
But you look at the overall landscape and that's pretty impressive when you see the names that are up there.
Yeah.
Um, Andrew Luck, what a what an
Yeah.
amazing talent that was
Yeah. We
versus
missed him. Yeah.
yeah, versus looking at an Eli Manning who
Yeah.
in fantasy football was very, very ordinary. That
Yeah.
was not a
Yeah.
really good level of play. So very interesting.
Yeah. I thought you'd like that. I think I will save the rest for next week because we have, it's noon here, and I know people are already tired of you and I running our mouth, but we it's just the way we do. I'll finish up with the quarterbacks. I think I'll go back to the tight ends, Dennis, and I should be able to send you both sets of metrics pretty soon, next couple of weeks, and I'll move on to
Very interesting data when you break it down like this.
yep, yep. And so we'll have more to say next week. I'll finish up the quarterbacks, and uh we'll have the two metrics, and I'll give you some quarterbacks that look good one way but not so good in the other. So we need to debate that, or at least be aware of that. So maybe MVP breaks a tie or something. If one sucks and one doesn't, that's the beauty of having multiple metrics. I haven't even done the calm stuff yet, so I'm gonna have that metric as well. So I'm looking forward to looking at our big list come June, July. Hopefully we'll get it done quicker than while we hit draft night out at the expo. That we'll have an extra uh, big stick to whip folks with this year, Dennis. The stick broke. We were whipping good, but then it broke. So we need to get an oak, not a old pine tree that snaps. So we need something a little stronger, and we're gonna have a little bit more time to cipher and have secret stuff. And nobody's, we're gonna make sure Tip doesn't get his eyes on the stalk to see our cheat sheet. I'm gonna tell him, you know, keep your eyes on your paper,
We're gonna
Tip.
have to have
Oh, yeah, Tip, keep your eyes on,
we're
no cheating. Professor says
we're
no
gonna
cheat. You
we're
cheat.
gonna have to have a list that only we understand
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
a lot of
Well, what we
green
need is
where
the old fake list, and you drop it out there. And I used to give two versions back when I taught freshmen, because freshmen will, it's amazing how their eyes start rolling in their head. They looking over here. So I do, like, form A, form B, and I completely mess the order of the multiple choice or the true false. And they look at, hold it now, that's false. Uh-oh, is it true? Or hey, they're A. I can catch people, and if they try to cheat and they got the wrong form, they it cost them. So I wouldn't tell them I had two forms. I just do it, and I saw them looking, and I could see the cheats could be like they'd shake their head like, uh oh, that's not the same question here. What the hell? The good students, they're not looking over there, not worried about the questions on their neighbor's paper. But the cheats were like, that's not the right order of questions. So I trick them, Dennis. Or my multiple choice, Dennis,
I
I'd go A, B, C, D, E, F, down about M. Yeah. And they just, and so the first, getting ready for the Dr. Bush, well, what are we going to, I will give you some true, false, and I'm multiple choice there. Oh, yeah, we like that. Yeah, you used to, the three answer true, false. All of a sudden, I gave them the A through M, and they didn't want my multiple choice anymore. They wanted my little short answer essays. They didn't like them true, false.
you were a you were
Yeah.
a diabolical professor,
Yeah.
I'm telling
Well,
you.
and, do the double negatives on the true, false. The answer is not this, except not that. And to be like, huh? And they'd be tricked and double negatives and all sorts of could be this, maybe is that. That'd be on the true false. Not all the time, could be sometime, all the time, half of the time. Man, their heads would explode, Dennis. Yeah. So if anybody's a teacher, I got some tricks there if you want to trick your students here. And one thing I'll say, Dennis, we had a professor that would show us these old transparencies. And so one time there was a trickster in the class that got a wax pencil and put extra dots. And those old transparencies heat up. And so he's sitting there lecturing to us, and he's sitting there, yeah, in this graph, and the dots started melting, Dennis, because it got hot, and he put a wax pencil. And those that were in on it, we knew it was going to happen. Everybody else looking around like, "What is going on?" The slide, the transparencies are the kids these days. They don't know what a transparency is, but and the transparency dots would melt. Isn't that bad? Yeah, they were not happy. Yeah, the old melting
So
transparent.
many tricks
That
you can
data is pretty fluid,
so,
Dennis. Where'd that dot go?
so many tricks you can play
Yeah, that was bad.
back in the
Anyway,
day.
you can wrap it up. The
Head on
multi,
over to the science of fantasyfootball.com.
yeah.
And folks, if you want to get a lesson of how to become a better fantasy football player, check out all the lesson plans that the professor John Bush offers for you. Look back at some
Way
of the
back.
past data articles that we have done as well,
Yeah.
and come up with your own theories, and don't be afraid to share them with us. And then head on back here next week for another edition of the Science of Fantasy Football.
Get to work, folks. Well, that was fun.
That was always fun, man.
Yeah,
We
my
we
math
go
guy, he'd
off on a
have those
lot of tangents.
transparencies and whatnot. And it's just like,
Oh,
I mean,
I yeah,
you remember those
oh
mimeograph
God, I
test and
do. And
transparencies and all that.
yeah, I had a teacher early on in like fifth or sixth grade
Yeah.
that when she do and this was again, it's weird how you remember the names of the crafty teachers, not necessarily the best teachers you
Well,
had,
the
but some of
crafty
the
ones.
clever ones.
Yeah.
But what she would do is she had three versions of the test,
Yeah.
and it depended on which row you were in as to which one you were getting
Yeah.
the order of the questions in.
Yeah.
And we only figured this out because, like, you know, she would have some of us help her with, you know,
Grading.
doing taking things down to the ditto machine. Remember the old ditto machines?
Yeah.
And we saw them coming out and we're like, wait a minute,
This
these
ain't
aren't
right.
this these aren't the same. And you didn't fall for that crap.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was but she could tell, like, she knew which row got which. So if you were sitting in row two,
Yeah.
and you were sharing off of row three or row one,
Rut row.
you were dead meat. You got caught real fast. But
But
yeah.
Dennis, in college, had a an interesting young lady. She, I was thinking maybe I could get some a date with this young lady. She grabbed, would sit next to me on test days and would grab my test after I'd filled a bunch of it. She'd copy, and I got her through
Oh
chemistry,
God.
but I never got a date. So so the old professor, he's halfway asleep up there, so it didn't matter. He'd he'd fall asleep in lab and wake up and everybody'd be
Oh
gone and he'd
God.
get mad, you know, and
That's funny.
yeah, and so some people would actually come back about an hour later and he'd be waking up from his nap and they'd be acting like they're still working. So he'd get mad at other people.
Oh God.
And he'd say, "Yeah, did they
That's
leave? Yes, sir.
hilarious.
Yes, sir. Yes, yes, doc. Yes, professor. They left. Well, I'm gonna remember that." And he wouldn't remember that, but he'd claim he'd remember from next week and chew their butt, and he never did. He'd go to sleep. He'd lean
Oh
back in my wooden chairs, and
God.
he'd be snoring. And we'd be goofing around and whatnot. I don't know, Dennis. We
It was
were,
amazing, amazing how bad some of the professors were at
yeah,
doing their job.
yeah. I hear you, man. I'm gonna quit recording.